I'm Jennifer, and you're listening to the Florida Gardener podcast. We had a houseplant question come in from the Carolinas. Let's call this lady BK. And yes, in case you're wondering, you don't have to live in Florida to submit a houseplant question. So BK's mother gifted her an English Ivy plant, and despite BK's best efforts, the plant is struggling, and she wants to know why. Let's see if we can help. So I'm not going to beat around the bush with this one. English Ivy is a diva. I would never recommend this as a houseplant. I do not use it for interior plant styling. I don't even use it outdoors anymore. And I know I'm not the first person to say this, but plant tags can be really misleading sometimes. I think BK even mentioned that it said on the plant tag for the English Ivy that it was low maintenance. And this couldn't be further from the truth. So the first thing I want to say to BK is this is not your fault, and do not be discouraged. Half the battle with gardening, whether inside your home or outside, is picking the right plants. It's not having a green thumb. If I bring English Ivy inside my home, it's gonna die. So this is not a reflection of you, because she did share that she's tried to be very thoughtful with this plant and following the care card instructions. We're going to cover some troubleshooting techniques if you do have a houseplant that is struggling. However, before doing so, I want to shout out a couple plants that I would strongly suggest to BK if you want to give this another shot. English Ivy is a trailing plant, right? So if you want something similar to that, the first thing that jumps out in my mind, and probably for a lot of you guys too, is pothos. Pothos is such a hardy, classic trailing plant for the inside of our homes. It also, sidebar, works really well outside in a shaded container garden. I work with pothos all the time inside restaurants, hotels, offices, and while each space is a little bit different, sort of like its own microclimate, and there isn't a plant that's literally going to do well in every single environment, I would say the pothos is pretty dang reliable. Now, there are situations where it's not a good fit. I have some offices that have no windows and it's very, very cold and dry, and even pothos won't survive in that type of situation. But for your average home and the temperatures that you're keeping it in, you're gonna be fine. Now, another plant that I want to highlight is Monstera. So there's the classic Monstera, but there's also a trailing Monstera. It's commonly known as the Swiss cheese vine. And this guy is pretty reliable inside too. So that is one that I recommend checking out. Its leaves have holes in it, kind of like Swiss cheese. It adds like a neat, fun element. Now, what I love about pothos is there are so many. You could just decorate with pothos alone and have so much variety and interest. So we have the golden pothos, which is like the classic traditional pothos. It's primarily green, but does have streaks of yellow or golden yellow markings. We have the marbled pothos, which has white marbling throughout. It's very pretty. There's the neon pothos, which has chartreuse colored leaves, really bright electric lime green leaves. It's really fun. So that gives you some options for trailing plants. There are lots of other interior plants. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but some others that aren't trailers but do just as well inside are the snake plant, the ZZ plant, and the cast iron plant. I highly recommend looking into those, especially the snake plant. That thing is very hardy. Kind of going back to what I was saying a little while ago about how some of the environments inside that I work with are really tough, like those offices. Not even pothos and Monstera can handle that type of environment, but I put a snake plant in there and it's totally fine. It's practically indestructible. Now, I do say practically because quite literally any plant will fail you given the right opportunity. That's a conversation for another day, but generally speaking, you can't go wrong with these choices. Okay, so we've discussed my feelings on English Ivy. We've given BK some great hardy alternatives if she wants to give houseplants a second chance. So now let's go over just some basic houseplant troubleshooting techniques that can be applied to really any plant inside that is struggling and you're unsure why. So one of the first things I always want to know is, are you overwatering? Usually when I ask someone this, the answer is no, or I don't think so. And then I ask a few more follow-up questions, and 9 times out of 10, they are indeed overwatering. So when it comes to plants inside our homes, they photosynthesize a lot slower than plants outside. This is because it's not as bright inside our homes as it is outside. Also, do not underestimate warmth, especially here in Florida. It's not nearly as warm inside our homes as it is outdoors. So, this also means they grow slower, they don't need as much fertilizer, they don't need as much water. So, while you might have a pothos outside potted with really good drainage that you can water every few days, maybe even every day, and the pothos is totally fine, that pothos is not going to respond the same way inside the home. Every environment is different, but with a lot of my interior clients, I'm only watering once every other week. And during the winter, some of them are only getting water once a month. And when people get nervous to leave their plants, or I know some people will hire interior plant sitters. I mean, if you have some really finicky, variegated plants, or if you live in some sort of crazy mansion with like an interior courtyard, okay, I get it. But for your average person with a few houseplants, or not even a few, if you have a ton of houseplants, but they're hardy, once again, rubber plant, cast iron, pothos, like any of those types of things, you don't need to hire anyone or have a neighbor come check on your plants, in my opinion. Overwatering is the quickest way to kill a houseplant. Once they get root rot, they're done. Now, on the other hand, underwatering, most plants bounce back just fine. So you might get back from vacation, or it's been a few weeks and your plant is starting to wilt because you haven't given it water. Do not freak out. I can almost guarantee that as soon as you give it some water, it's gonna bounce back. So that'll just be like a really good way to get a feel for how often you should be watering your plants. Once you have a good reading on that, the goal would be that they wilt less often because you know how frequently to water them. But you almost don't know how much water they need or don't need until you back off from the watering, if that makes sense. Outside, totally different, you guys. This does not apply. But inside, do not be nervous. A lot of times people want to know signs overwatering versus underwatering. It really does depend. So these are very loose guidelines, but in my experience, it has a lot of yellowing leaves. It may be receiving too much water. And then, of course, if the soil is really wet all the time, you want your plant to be able to dry out between waterings. And then if it's not receiving enough water, it'll start drooping and wilting and just look really sad. Another important factor is how much water you give your interior plant. You hear a lot online about watering deeply and thoroughly. That absolutely applies to outdoor plants. When you water, really water it so the water is coming out of the drainage hole. But when it comes to interior plants, this is not always the case. With a pothos, yes, you can probably get away with that. But with an interior white bird of paradise, for example, if you give it that much water when you do water, even if you're only watering every other week or whatever it might be, that is probably too much water for that specific plant. They just don't handle it as well. Their trunk will get really soggy and then the plant just slowly dies. I personally don't look to fully saturate the soil with a lot of the interior plants that I take care of. It also depends on how much light it's receiving, how much warmth it's receiving, how much humidity. So if you're unsure, just err on the side of caution. Give it a little bit of water, and then each time you go to water it, maybe just try giving it a little bit more. See how it responds to that. And give it more than a day or two to respond. Give it a week and see how the plant reacts. Let's move on to light. Light is something that's discussed a lot in the houseplant world when you Google plant care. You can buy light meters to figure out how much light you have in the house. Some people have indoor grow lights. I've never used grow lights and I've never properly measured the light inside my home or for a client, with a light meter. I tend to just assess a space. Ideally, if you can see it at different points in the day too, that's really good to see how the light moves throughout the room. I also pay a lot of attention to warmth, which we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. But I'm also just not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm never gonna put some sort of finicky, high maintenance, variegated monstera inside a restaurant for a client. If you're gonna be dealing with high maintenance plants, then you do need to take lighting a step further. I've also just gone through a lot of trial and error, having my own plants and then having my business and seeing what performs and what doesn't. But generally speaking, if you have decent lighting, a lot of the plants that we are discussing today will do well. Some other ones that we haven't really touched on are the corn plant and the rubber plant. Light is important, so I'm not trying to downplay that. But also, I think it's important to understand that all interior plants have a shelf life. Once heard someone say that when you're designing an interior space, you just want to pick plants that die very slowly. And I could not agree more with that because our indoor environment is not their natural environment. I don't care what a plant tag says. So that's the goal, just picking plants that die very slowly. And while light is very important, once again, I always go to this office example, but I have an office with minimal natural lighting and the snake plants are just fine. I mean, they grow a lot slower, but they're fine. The artificial light in the office is giving them enough. Now, something really interesting about light that I want to highlight is you might think that you have a really bright, high light room, but I promise you, it's not nearly as sunny as you think it is. The light inside is never as intense as outside. Our eyes are actually very misleading. And I think I got this from the Houseplant Journal. My apologies if it was someone else that said it. But the human eye can actually trick us, and it masks the difference in lighting in our home by constantly dilating and constricting to adapt to different light levels. So I just think that's really interesting. If you want to get really nerdy with it, go get one of those light meters and it'll really help you understand, and then use it outside too. That way you can really gauge the difference. All right, let's move into warmth, humidity. Every space is different. I have a restaurant client with like an open kitchen concept, and most any of the tropical plants that I put in there just thrive. They love the warmth from that open kitchen. But then, I compare that to some of my other clients. Like I have a coffee shop that is kind of chilly inside. So depending on where the plant is, if it's by a door that's frequently opened, that could be okay. But if it's like further in the coffee shop, away from the doors, where it's a little chillier, that same plant may not do as well. And then that office that I keep talking about, that's dark and frigid, yeah, good luck. That is like a very high maintenance environment. So it really does differ a lot. And then when it comes to homes, same deal. My house versus my mom's, totally different. We both live in like older homes, but my mom's has no insulation. And then in addition to that, my mom, her boyfriend likes it really cold inside the home. She likes it really warm. So in her room, she opens up the windows, and I'm sure that doesn't help their electric bill at all, but she opens up all her windows so she gets a lot of that warm, humid air in her room. And that combined with the fact that the home just isn't insulated well, I mean, she can grow a lot of things on her windowsill. Even English ivy does fairly well for her. My home, on the other hand, is a lot more dry inside, and my boyfriend would kill me if I tried to open up the windows and do what my mom does. So yeah, it's not the same. It's important to remember where the plants come from. If they're from Southeast Asia or a tropical rainforest, that's something we can't completely replicate inside our home, but it does help you understand what the plant is looking for. So you might be wondering, why is English ivy so high maintenance inside? Well, I don't claim to have all the answers when it comes to why some plants perform really well inside versus, other plants being a little bit more finicky. But what I will say is I do try to always understand what are the natural conditions of that plant. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise, but English ivy is a European plant, and it seems like it naturally grows in like more woodland places that are wet and moist, but also cool. Based on what I was reading, I want to say 50 to 75 degrees is their ideal temperature range. For us Americans, picture like a woodland in Washington state. You have all that moist dampness, but it's also very temperate. It doesn't want really extreme winters or extreme summers, but it seems like it can handle the cold better than a very hot summer. And that's why you don't see a lot of it in Florida, especially South Florida. outdoors. I've played around with it and grown it, but it always seems a little like stunted in growth and just doesn't perform well, which makes sense. I think about my mom and her conditions that she's created in her room, and I think that's why her ivy has done okay. The temperature inside their home is probably like 70 degrees, right? When they have the AC going. But my mom, because she's a little nutty, love her, but she keeps her windows open. So she's also getting a little bit of that humidity, but not so much. That's like kind of being balanced out with the indoor air. So whereas like if that ivy was just outside on her lanai, it wouldn't do well. And if she had it inside with the window closed, it would probably be too dry. That's my best guess. So I hope that helps. If you guys have any other houseplant, interior plant questions, please let me know. I love talking about this stuff. I'm still learning. A lot of it's trial and error, but I'm happy to share anything that has helped me along the way. So yeah, shoot me a message. All right, so that wraps up another episode of The Florida Gardener. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, if you'd like to subscribe to my free newsletter, shop my online garden collection, or submit your own plant question, you can access everything via my website, rootsredefined.com. That's roots, ROOTS, redefined, REDEFINED.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I'd greatly appreciate it if you'd leave me a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. That would mean a ton. All right, thanks so much, and I'll see you guys again soon.